have to ask the question is what's the alternative to control? And ultimately it is trust. So here's another one. This one is really pretty fascinating. It's from one of my favorite movies, Bruce Almighty. And guess what's in the drawer? Okay, here we go.
This last entry was a little disturbing. The gloves are off, God. God has taken my bird and my bush. God is a mean kid with a magnifying glass. Smite me, almighty smiter. Now, I'm not much for blaspheming, but that last one made me laugh.
Spider? Who are you?
I'm the one. Creator of the heavens and the earth. Alpha and Omega.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Bruce. I'm God.
Bingo! Yahtzee! Is that your final answer? Our service has God! Bing, 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 bing! Well, it was nice to meet you, God. Thank you for the Grand Canyon, and good luck with your cruise. And by the way, you suck! You know what would have been a little bit more impressive, though? If you hadn't used the cheesy file cabinet illusion. Anybody with a brainstem can tell that that drawer is identical wall from the other side. All you have to do is find the crease right around here. There is a seam here. Or a hollow spot.
Where? Through the drywall and concrete?
Yeah, that is a good one. That is a good one. How many fingers am I holding up?
Now, Bruce, thou shalt not tempt the Lord.
Hey, if you can't do it, man, that's cool.
3, 2, 4, 9, 6, 8, 1.
Okay. How many now?
7. You've been doing a lot of complaining about me, Bruce. Quite frankly, I'm tired of it.
Wait. Don't come near me, seriously. When I'm back in the corner with a wild animal, I want to hurt you, but I will have instinct.
You haven't won a fight since grade 5, and that was against a girl.
She is huge.
The sun was in your eyes. Anyway, I thought you get off your job.
Off my job.
My job. You think you can do it better, so here's your chance. When you leave this building, you will be endowed with all my powers.
All right. What's fascinating to me in a lot of this is that the drawer is all of the cataloging that we do of all the things we should have been, could have been, and might have been, including all the things that we did wrong. We don't have a drawer with all our successes. We have a drawer with all the things we've done wrong. So why do we play God? Simple answer, because we don't trust him. It's just simple. It's not that difficult. We don't trust him, and by extension, we don't trust anybody else. So the short answer, which I've said to you before many times, is control and trust cannot coexist. Trust and risk always coexist. Always. You cannot have trust without risk. So as Brene Brown reminded us, vulnerability requires trust. Trust requires vulnerability. If we are committed to controlling the outcomes, controlling what people think, and everything else about them, then we will avoid vulnerability, but talk about its value. And that's the bottom line. That really is where we land. And again, this can tempt you into the conclusion that this is hopeless. I can't get out of this hole that I'm in because I can't seem to not do this. I got news for you, folks. Everybody is assaulted with the need to control for one main reason. Original sin, the basis of original sin was control. Because before sin entered the world, God told Adam and Eve, you can eat freely of any tree in the garden, except those ones I tell you not to. So we are given freedom in exchange for what? Trusting God's best judgment for what we shouldn't participate in. So trust and control cannot coexist, and we play God because we don't trust him or we don't trust anyone else. Now, where does this take us? Well, where it takes us is into kind of what we're actually focused on when it comes to playing God. And one of the things that we focus on is, first of all, what this class is, the centerpiece of this class, is our image, our reputation, how other people see us. This is the stained glass and how we maintain it. And the stems that I gave you to begin to build your stained glass are all about that. I don't want you to think that. I don't want to be perceived as. That's the basis of image management. And in a lot of cases, for a lot of us, when it comes to our Christian life, we are more committed to image management and sin management than we are to heart development. So our image, we've already spent a lot of time talking about that. We're also committed to controlling other people and what they think or conclude about us. One of the biggest hurdles, and it continues to be, here we are sitting now after the middle of the term, and one of the biggest challenges in all the small groups is we minimize and we relativize and we compare the issues that we have rolling around in our head and saying, well, it's not that big of a deal compared to what other people need to talk about. Oh, really? Who died and left you in charge for what they should need to talk about? Well, ultimately, it comes down to how can I minimize my risk and therefore minimize my intimacy? It all blends together here, folks. So managing the perceptions of others. The funny thing about it is, if I did an interview or did a poll as you walked out those doors and asked every one of you, can you control what other people perceive about you? And to a person, we will probably say no. To a person. But that doesn't stop us from trying. So the other part about it is our problem, all problems, and our problems. We refuse to see problems or shortcomings or flaws as an important part of our journey into trust. So what do we do instead? All problems, our problems, need to be fixed or neutralized. As a matter of fact, I need to have everything in order before I talk to anybody about that. And the funny thing about it is, if I were able to do that, there would be no reason for me to talk to anybody about it. And sooner or later, people run to the end of their rope and say, I can't do it. And then they say, maybe I should talk to somebody. So there's a lot of this that goes into it. All problems are problems. And the last one is all pain. Controlling our pain. And the problem is that we do not define our terms when it comes to pain. We say all pain is bad. Every bit of it. Anything that makes me uncomfortable or uncertain or anything is pain. I would suggest to you that there are at least three kinds of pain. The kind of pain that indicates destruction. My knee. My pain is a very good indication there's something dramatically wrong in my knee. God's designed us with a system of our bodies that says, if something's wrong, it hurts. Pay attention to that. leprosy is not a disease of the skin. Leprosy is a disease of pain receptors in the body. And imagine what would happen if you were working out with somebody or you were running somewhere and you sprained your ankle and it didn't register at all in your body that you had sprained your ankle. What would happen if you continued to walk on that ankle as if it was perfect? There was nothing wrong with it. It would get worse. It would tear more. And eventually it would become gangrenous because the infection would take off like a lightning rod throughout all of that. See, pain is the very thing that tells us something's wrong. But also it indicates growth. There's a lot of pain in growth. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's emotional. We talked a little bit about that, looking at the lifespan. And lastly, there's pain that's just simply part of the journey. It's not designed, if you will, to be easy. It's just part of the journey. It doesn't make it bad. It just makes it indicating I'm moving. So if we say all pain is bad, what does that mean? What it ends up meaning is I will do everything in my power, including your perceptions of me, to make sure I don't feel bad, because all pain is bad. So what I want to do, I have 7 destructive thoughts that go into the anatomy of control. The first one is a commitment to performance and task completion versus relationships and connection, while still getting the task done. And a lot of times so many of us are caught with this quote. When I'm working on a project, I often become so focused that I get irritated when somebody interrupts me, and I tend to snap at them. Don't interrupt me. My task is more important. It's the basis of getting things done. But we have to understand that it's weighed against something else. We would never say, here comes the values we talk about versus the reality that we live. We would never say that relationships are more important than getting any task done. But when we're focused on a task, it's pretty hard to cut ourselves loose and put it in perspective and say, no, this relationship is more important than anything else. As part of just this anatomy, if you will, of the control. Here's another one. I'm uncomfortable with ideas that are different than mine. See, our insecurity, our conclusion about our worthiness or worth or value causes us to have a very low tolerance for people that have opinions different than us, because it is a threat. It's a threat to our validity as a person. If I can't have complete agreement from everybody around me, then I'm not worth anything. I don't have any value. I don't have any standing with anyone. And then I don't count. I'm a nobody. I have nothing to offer anyone. And it pushes the envelope of really how we are and who we are. I try to control as much of my life and the people in it as possible. With this particular one, there are obvious practices to this one, and there are subtle practices. The obvious practices in this will harken back to some of the things that we talked about with the boundaries, the aggressive controllers, the manipulative versus the aggressive controllers. The obvious part is manipulating and busyness, bossiness, I should say, escalating, giving unsolicited advice. You know what I think you should do? Remember the stance between me too versus you should? So the obvious practices here of trying to control as much of my life and the people in it as I can is intimidation and pushiness. And this is how it should be done. There's only one way for this thing to get done. That's all very much a part of what goes into this. So that's the obvious practices. The less obvious, more subtle practices looks like this. Withdrawal. We punish people for having an opinion different than us by withdrawing from them. So what does that say? Well, it says that my presence counts enough that if I withdraw it, it'll convince them to think otherwise. Ignoring advice, procrastinating, giving weak excuses, quietly uncooperative, dragging our feet, not showing up on time. A lot of times those have meaning. It's like, I don't want to be part of your meeting, I'll just show up late. There. You get the point? No, because I'm trying to make a point to somebody who doesn't care. The preservation of oneself at the expense of others through dominance, whether obvious or subtle. And most of us end up doing the subtle routine because we can get our digs in without the person realizing that we're actually getting our digs in. And then we're safe still. There's the stained glass comes into play. So the challenge is how do I control other people? Well, I want their opinion to be the same as mine. That's what goes into this. And I can't tolerate the fact that they see the world differently than I do, which means I don't see any value in them seeing the world differently than I do. Really, when it comes right down to it, it's my way, you know the rest of the phrase, right? Or the highway. So here's another one. I often feel the drive to do something because of my duty or obligation. This one gets drilled into us. This one gets drilled into us in families and everywhere. And we have to make the distinction between commitment and obligation or duty. Commitment is about a free choice. When somebody asks me to do something and I commit myself to help them, I restrict myself. They are not restricting me. They're not robbing me of my choices because I feel guilty. So commitment is about free choice. Obligation is about forced activity. I manipulate and I push and I guilt and I shame and get them to do it against their will. That's controlling. It's robbing their choices. What's fascinating is that even how we think about ourselves is robbing people of the opportunity to tell you that you're worth something. To tell you that you count. To tell you that they grieve over what you've experienced. We don't tell them that because we're ashamed of what we've done, and therefore they will think that I'm shameful, and therefore I will still end up back where I started. So we end up robbing people the opportunity to actually bless us with their words by not allowing them to know what's going on. Here's another one. It's difficult for me to admit my weaknesses, flaws, and shortcomings. Have you ever heard, you know, you're never wrong? I've heard it. I can know it all better than any of you. I've had a little bit more experience to be able to throw that crap around. So trying to write, and why do we do this? Basically, we're trying to write the ideal script for our lives, and it will never include the ugly side, which is funny, because when you start looking at how Paul describes our ministry to each other, it is not based on all of our successes. It is based on all of our failures, which are failures. They're being human, making mistakes, and out of that we find compassion for others. So, the stained glass is about the ideal script. It's creating a narrative that doesn't show any of the quote-unquote ugly side of our nature. Now, doesn't mean that I trumpet it with pride, but it also doesn't mean that I hide it with shame. It means I live with it. There's that preposition again. So, we oftentimes, people may not tell us that we're never wrong, but they'll walk away saying, well, I'm not going to give that kind of feedback because they always get it right. And the funny thing is we'll buy each other's narrative, for a really cheap price. If you say it, I'll believe it. I don't like my emotions or others to get out of control. We're committed to keeping this tight control over all emotions. And the thing to remember is taking you back to something that Brene Brown said. It's a package deal. If I keep such tight control over all these emotions, then I'm going to keep tight control over all emotions. When I'm committed to not living as human with the struggles and the confusions and everything else, and I don't want to hear it from other people, okay, then I'm cutting off everything at the knees. The level of excitement, the level of joy is going to be truncated. Now you might say in your heart and say, well, no, I'm willing to let people get out of control with their emotions. I tolerate that just fine. Well, if you're ever around somebody that's starting to, quote unquote, fall apart, which is a misnomer, because more often than not, when people are falling apart, they're actually finding their heart. When we're ever around people that are falling apart, we really jump to attention to show them how to put it all back together again like Humpty Dumpty. And when we do that, we're saying something. We're saying, don't let it go too far. Don't lose it too much. Look at all of the words we use around showing authentic human emotion. I'm falling apart, I'm melting down, I'm breaking apart, I can't hold it together. Look at all the words we use around that. And that's, it's one of those things where, you guys have heard me say this before, that I finally come to a place in my life that I refuse to apologize for the tears that I shed. I finally have found a way, I don't know how, but I finally found the freedom to say, if that's what I feel, why should I hide it? Because it means it's connected to people that I love. And most often than not, tears not only show pain, but they also show how powerfully we love somebody. Okay, here's another one. If these haven't gotten irritating enough. I get irritated when other people make mistakes. The reality is we have idealistic expectations of ourselves and others. Kind of the standing joke around people that are perfectionists is they take great pains to get things done and then pass it on to everyone else. The thing to keep in mind is our frailties and flaws are not just seen as a problem or an inconvenience, they are despised. And I use that word intentionally. Frustration boils over when others and ourselves don't perform at expected levels. Why are others such an issue around performance? Because we don't have good enough boundaries to let that be their performance. It reflects on us. Because we're related to them. How many, don't raise your hands, but how many of us identified really strongly with that kind of candidate for shame, over responsible? And when I'm over responsible, I'll not only take responsibility for me, I'll take responsibility for everybody else around me. And if they don't perform at adequate levels, I'm going to get frustrated. Because if they don't, I don't. So I get irritated at other people's mistakes. Those are the dirty seven of the thoughts that drive along our control. Now, without thoughts, we can have thoughts, but we also have emotions. And there are at least four that I want to highlight for you. The first one is anger. When I have expectations of others and they don't know, because I'll never tell them, my expectations of them, bitterness and anger and resentment grows. They're built on my demand that other people conform to my expectations and what it's supposed to be. Now, after all, we don't even give it a second thought that our expectations are realistic for one or even appropriate for somebody else. We don't really evaluate that at all. But anger is the basis on which We actually betray our expectations of others. And so we won't say it initially because anger metastasizes into resentment and bitterness. It is the basis of that, and it contaminates the emotional water table that is in us and shows up in our emotions and how we interact with somebody else. So anger is one. Another one is fear. The reality is we'll never admit how fearful we are in our relationships with others and where we are. You know, we're always trying to check why do we get caught with the compulsive comparers? Because it's the fear of being or doing something wrong. Probably more importantly, being wrong. And so we don't walk down this path, and we really don't look at it. It does show up when we get defensive, or when we turn it around and accuse the other person of things. And attribute motives. This is one of those things where when I'm in everyday conversations with my family members and other people, I am calibrated to notice automatically how often we attribute motives to somebody that betrays how fearful we are. You meant to do that. I know you did, because you wanted to show what an idiot I am. Now, that's not going to be said necessarily, but the defensiveness will show. So fear. The third one, let's break these out a little bit in terms of fear. Places where it shows up: denial, the refusal to admit the truth and reject our humanness. Denial shows it. Evasiveness, we can avoid contact. We punish people by removing ourselves. And then finally, boomerang communication. The accused becomes the accuser. The person says, let me give you some feedback. And they say, do you know how much I have put up with you over the years? And suddenly, I'm on my heels because suddenly now I am part of the conversation, or I am the subject of the conversation. So we turn it around, and it turns into, what do we do the calculations? Well, I'm sure as heck not going to give them that kind of feedback. Because if I do, I'm going to end up being sliced and diced and served up for dinner, yeah.
Is that the same as defensiveness?
Yeah, it would. I mean, defensiveness is just escalating with feedback. We may not boomerang it, but sometimes we will. And so it's a little bit of both. I mean, defensiveness is kind of the launch pad for the boomerang. But it's always, yeah, but you kind of formulation. Defensiveness may not necessarily get that way. Sometimes we don't really even identify when we're getting defensive. And that's the place where important people in our lives really come in pretty handy, if we're willing to listen to them. It's like somebody were to say, look, you're sounding pretty defensive. And generally, what will we say? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not defensive. It's like, wait, did you just hear what you said? I don't know what you're talking about. If you weren't such a schmuck, I wouldn't be such a defensive person. There you go. So, fear. Another one, worry. Yeah, Cam?
I feel like most people that struggle with control, if they don't have like a lot of close relationships, it's because people aren't willing to or don't know how to set up boundaries.
People aren't willing to?
They're not willing to set up the boundaries to not be controlled, or they just don't know how to.
Well, they flee the relationship because they can't stand against the controlling person.
Right.
So, in a lot of cases, being in the presence and dealing with somebody who's controlling, we just flee it rather than, like you're saying, having the boundaries necessary to stand against it.
So do you think that a lot of the, not burden, but responsibility can be on the person to set up boundaries rather than, and not let someone walk all over you?
It's both. It's both. I mean, let's be clear, who's initiating the interaction? There's always an interaction effect whenever we're talking about communication between two people. If somebody is able to actually have the boundaries and set them in place, then a lot of times the controlling person will then just find somebody else. And we talked about that in the boundaries, is a lot of times aggressive controllers will find somebody that will be compliant and make their lives easier and do whatever they say. So they're not going to hang around with somebody who has good boundaries. So yeah, it's a little bit, it's both and, it's not an either or. Who's responsible? Yeah, both of them.
But I feel like if you do struggle with boundaries, and one of the, I don't know if it's the only way, but the main way to work on that is in relationship.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, having at least a model to work from is a way to do that. I mean, that's in a lot of cases, that's why the group experience is so powerful, is you actually get to see what it looks like and to be able to do it a little bit better. But I mean, I can learn a lot from somebody who's fairly decent at boundaries, but I'm not going to get to see them interact with somebody who's controlling. A lot of times I won't. But I can still learn the basics of boundaries with hanging out with somebody like that, for sure. There's probably no person who pushes the envelope as much as somebody who is dealing with the control stuff that we're talking about here. I wouldn't call them a controlling person because that's too static. Well, in a lot of cases, people that struggle with control, if they're around people with boundaries and the relationship's important enough, they'll adapt. They'll adapt just fine. But when somebody isn't willing to kind of set the limit on boundaries and be clear about where things are, then they'll run roughshod over somebody. So, yeah. The other one, worry, feeling of apprehension, distress, or uneasiness, it's all focused on the future. It's focused on a predicted future event. And since we're absolutely 100% correct on every predicted future event, we have reason to worry. But what I find fascinating is when you look at the Old English of the origins of the word worry, it means to strangle or give pain. It strangles our focus of the future down to only what we can predict. So it paralyzes us in how we see things, and then we react as if it's already true. Okay, now every one of us can say, my odds of getting the future right are 50-50 at best. In other words, random. But when we make these kind of predictions, we not only make the predictions, but we act as if they're true. So are they true? I don't know. But I feel better off predicting the worst, which goes into 4 different fallacies that are part of worry. The first one is the tendency to focus on minutia. How many times have we gotten involved in a project and we realize at some point that we're so taken with all these extra details that we're running out of time to get the overall project done? Minutia. It gives us some way to focus our energies, all of this worry and anxiety we feel, it gives us some avenue to focus all of our attention. So we focus on minutia, or we assume that the future will repeat the past. We have to, the problem with the future is it's uncertain. And if we're focused on making things certain that are uncertain, which is what control is about, then we'll just take the past and just predict it or impose it on the future. The way things have been is the way things always will be. Remember that. Because when we looked at shame in 3 scenes, remember what I said the voice of shame says? You will always be what you've always been. This is the voice of shame and worry. The future will always be what it's always been, past. We lack the confidence in ourselves and figuring out our own resources to address the predicted catastrophe. generally speaking, we focus on the catastrophe rather than our ability to actually find the resources necessary to deal with it if it comes. Not when it comes, if it comes. Now we react again. This is one of these places where Kurt Thompson, in talking about shame and kind of the physiological interface, is where our body doesn't know the difference. So when I predict a catastrophe in the future, it doesn't know I'm predicting. It just assumes that it's true. So what happens in your body? Adrenaline flows into the system, cortisol flies into the system, and you go into, you know, the fight or flight or freeze. I will fly into that. The body is calibrated against what the mind will do. So when I predict a future that is catastrophic, then my body will follow suit. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. The last one is shame, not guilt. Let's get our terms clear, because guilt is about our behavior. It's about our ability to actually change our behavior. I compare it against a value that I have. It doesn't match. I will make changes and get closer to that value standard that I have set. Shame, on the other hand, is all about who I am, my identity. And so that element in it is going to be the shame that I feel. I want to crawl in a hole. I want to hide. I don't want you to see me. All of those things are very much a part of controlling behavior. So what does that mean? I then show you the best part of me. And we're back to then the creation of the stained glass and how it actually works. So where do we go from here? Now that we've set the stage, the antidote to control is a commitment to 3 key values. The first one is choice. Choice. Control is about limiting choice. The antidote to control is expanding choice. To empower another to own him or herself, to expand the choices available to them. Most of the time, if I say, why don't you give somebody a choice? They will generally say, well, why do I want that? Because they'll pick something I don't want them to. So choice is the antidote to control, is expanding the choices that the other person has. The second thing is freedom. Freedom puts a priority on relationships. Now pay attention to that, please. Because God sent Jesus so that we could finally be free. Free for what? To choose. Because as long as we were dead in our sins, dead people can't choose. Live people can. And God took the chance, if you want to say it that way, since he's not really working on chances, but he took the chance to allow us to choose him, which means he also gave us the opportunity to not choose him, which makes yes even more important, because it's chosen. There's choice again. So freedom, it allows others to be who we are, it allows me to be who I am, and it cultivates, the last one is cultivating humility. So we got 3 things: choice, freedom, and cultivating humility. Cultivating humility is a realistic appraisal on who I am, not based on shame. Humility is not something I produce. Humility is a fruit of the Spirit. It comes out of cultivating something, not out of producing something. And we're almost out of time. So I'll finish this one. We're always overlapping each class period anyway. We'll finish up the cultivating of humility, and then we'll move on to the next fun, intrusive topic I have for you. See ya.